Imagine, for a moment, being pushed deeper and deeper into a dark, silent forest. Not by a stranger, but by the person you trusted most in the world. The wheels of Clara Bennett's wheelchair left soft tracks in the damp earth as her husband, Henry, guided her further away from the road, away from everything she knew. The evening shadows stretched long and distorted, and with every yard gained, Clara's unease twisted into a knot of fear in her stomach. "Henry!" Her voice was a little shaky, trying hard to sound steady. "Where exactly are we going?" His reply came back, cold and utterly devoid of warmth, a stark contrast to the loving words she remembered from years ago. "Somewhere you won't be my burden anymore." In the hushed stillness of Blackwood Forest, unseen eyes watched from the dense trees, eyes that saw the chilling finality in Henry's posture, the way he avoided Clara's gaze. Eyes that saw the beginning of something unspeakable, a moment that would redefine Clara's life and reveal a darkness she never imagined. It makes you wonder, how could a heart turn so cruel, and when faced with such a profound betrayal, where do you even begin to look for hope? But this story, this descent into darkness in Blackwood Forest, didn't truly begin under the cold moonlight. It began much earlier, with a life that, from the outside, looked utterly perfect, in a charming place called Sterling Creek, Massachusetts. But this story, this descent into darkness in Blackwood Forest, didn't truly begin under the cold moonlight. It began much earlier, with a life that, from the outside, looked utterly perfect, in a charming place called Sterling Creek, Massachusetts. Before the darkness, there was light. A life meticulously designed, filled with love and success. Clara Bennett, at 32, was living what many would consider a dream. She ran her own thriving interior design firm right here in Sterling Creek. If you walked into a beautifully appointed home or a stylish local business, chances are, Clara's touch was everywhere. She had an eye for detail, a knack for blending comfort with elegance, turning spaces into something truly special. Visual cue. Imagine seeing glimpses of stunning rooms, light-filled and inviting, showcasing her talent. She poured her heart into her work, and it showed. And then there was Henry Dalton. He was her college sweetheart from Ashwood University, where Clara studied design and Henry was pursuing business. They met, as many young couples do, in a simple, everyday moment, a collision at a campus coffee shop, Clara spilling her latte all over Henry's economics textbook. Flashback visual cue, a quick, warm image of a bustling college coffee shop, two young people awkwardly bumping into each other, then dissolving into laughter. That embarrassed apology somehow turned into a 4-hour conversation, easy and natural, and by the end of that week, they were inseparable. Their love story felt like something out of a movie. 12 years after that coffee shop meeting, they were married and settled into a beautifully renovated Victorian home at 14 Elm Street in Sterling Creek's leafy suburbs. Their life together seemed, well, perfect. It was the kind of life you saw in magazines or, in modern times, the kind you saw curated perfectly on social media, an Instagram-perfect existence that was the envy of friends and family alike. They had built something wonderful, or so it seemed. In those early Ashwood years, before Henry, there had been another significant person in Clara's life, Walter Hayes. Walter was different, intense, principled, with a quiet strength that hinted at a tougher past than many students knew. He was there on a military scholarship, focused, already planning a future dedicated to service, aiming for the special forces after graduation. Walter and Clara shared a deep connection, a bond built on understanding and mutual respect. But they wanted different things. He was committed to a path that meant unpredictable deployments, potentially dangerous locations, a life far from settled. Clara, with her passion for design, dreamed of building her business, laying down roots, finding stability in one place. Breaking up with Walter was one of the hardest things she'd ever done. It felt like losing a part of herself, like closing a door on a different possible future. Flashback visual cue, a quiet, slightly wistful image of Walter and Clara talking on a park bench at Ashwood, perhaps looking at each other with shared understanding, but also sadness. Their paths diverged completely after college. Walter went into the military, a world Clara could only imagine. Clara built her life with Henry, a life of comfortable predictability and shared dreams, or what she thought were shared dreams. Looking back on that time, that picture of success and happiness in Sterling Creek, you realize how easily we can be drawn to the surface of things, the beautiful facade. We see the perfectly designed rooms, the smiling faces in photos, the comfortable home, and we project our own ideas of happiness onto them. Sometimes, the most beautiful pictures hide the faintest, most insidious lines that we don't even notice, until a brushstroke goes terribly wrong. That brushstroke, for Clara Bennett, appeared in the most devastating form imaginable. An accident. That brushstroke, for Clara Bennett, appeared in the most devastating form imaginable. An accident. Life, they say, can change in an instant. One wrong turn, one swerve of fate, and everything you knew, everything you planned, is gone. It happened 3 years into her marriage with Henry. Clara was driving home from a client meeting, the kind of routine trip she'd made countless times before. A thunderstorm had rolled in, heavy rain blurring the edges of the road. Then, chaos. Another car, hydroplaning, swerved violently into her lane. Visual cue brief, jarring imagery, headlights through rain, a sudden, violent impact sound effect, then silence. The resulting crash wasn't just a fender bender, it was catastrophic. Clara woke up in the hospital, facing a reality so brutal it felt like a bad dream. A severed spinal cord, permanent paralysis from the waist down. The doctor's words hung in the sterile air, heavy and final. She would never walk again. Visual cue. A sterile hospital room, medical equipment, a doctor's serious face, then a close-up on Clara's eyes, wide with disbelief and pain. The physical pain was immense, a constant burning ache that settled into her new, uncooperative body. But the emotional toll, that was a different kind of agony. Her thriving design business, the one she'd built with such pride and hard work, immediately suffered. Client meetings became impossible. Site visits were out of the question. The medical bills, even with insurance, piled up quickly. A daunting mountain of paper that added another layer of stress to an already unbearable situation. Visual cue, a static shot of a stack of medical bills, growing taller. Clara spent months in rehabilitation, months learning how to live again in a world that wasn't built for her new reality, learning to navigate life from a wheelchair, relearning the simplest tasks that had once been second nature. It was frustrating, exhausting, and deeply humbling. Every small victory felt monumental, every setback crushing. Visual cue footage, perhaps slightly shaky or from a low angle, of Clara struggling with physical therapy, learning to transfer from bed to wheelchair, the sheer effort involved. Throughout this, Henry was initially there. He played the part of the devoted husband beautifully. He told everyone how brave his wife was, how they would get through this together, a united front against adversity. He was attentive, at least in public. He seemed concerned, supportive. And Clara, reeling from the physical and emotional trauma, clinging to the life she had built, desperately wanted to believe him. She needed that anchor, that reassurance that her marriage, at least, was still solid ground in a world that had suddenly shifted beneath her. There are moments in life, aren't there, where everything changes so completely, so irrevocably, that you have to ask yourself, is this the end? Is this where the story stops? Or is this just the brutal, painful beginning of something else? For Clara, it wasn't the end, not in the way she feared, losing her life in that car wreck, but it was the undeniable start of a different kind of change, a transformation far more insidious, far more terrifying than the accident itself. For Clara, it wasn't the end, not in the way she feared, losing her life in that car wreck, but it was the undeniable start of a different kind of change, a transformation far more insidious, far more terrifying than the accident itself. The mask of devotion, it turned out, can only hold for so long. In the months following the accident, as Clara focused on the grueling process of rehabilitation, the cracks in her seemingly perfect marriage began to show, slowly, subtly at first. Henry's initial performance of the devoted husband started to wear thin. Behind closed doors, a different reality was emerging. Visual cue. The camera lingers on the doorway of their home, perhaps looking in, creating a sense of being an unseen observer. The size started small. Comments about how their beautiful Victorian home, once a source of pride, wasn't designed for this situation. Passive-aggressive remarks about the size of frustration Henry felt when he had to help Clara transfer from her wheelchair to the bed at night. Then came the complaints, more direct now, about how her mounting medical expenses were impacting our lifestyle, the life Henry clearly felt entitled to maintain without sacrifice. Visual cue. A brief, silent shot of Henry looking stressed while helping Clara. Maybe a quick roll of the eyes when she's not looking. Or a shot of him staring at bank statements with a grimace. It was 6 months after the accident when Henry convinced Clara to sign over control of her design business. Just temporarily, he insisted, so she could fully focus on recovery without the stress of managing things. He presented it as practical, necessary, even helpful, and Clara, still in pain, still exhausted, still navigating the emotional turmoil of her new limitations, agreed. She trusted him. He was her husband. Who else would look out for her visual cue, a shot of Clara signing papers, perhaps near a window with gray, overcast light, highlighting the feeling of giving something away. Looking back, with the clarity that only time and distance can bring, she would realize this was the beginning of the financial abuse, the systematic isolation. He was taking control, bit by bit, under the guise of care. There's a quiet, internal struggle when you realize the person who vowed to love you in sickness and in health is beginning to resent the sickness. You start to feel like a burden. You apologize for things you can't control. You shrink, trying to take up less space, cause less trouble. Clara felt this acutely. Her world, once vibrant and expansive, was already beginning to feel smaller. Sometimes, control starts in the most unexpected places. Wrapped tightly in the language of concern or help, it's a slow erosion, barely noticeable until the foundation begins to crumble. And then, Henry brought a new presence into their home, one that would push the cracks in their marriage even wider, and much, much deeper. And then, Henry brought a new presence into their home, one that would push the cracks in their marriage even wider, and much, much deeper. He hired an assistant. Her name was Cynthia Marsh, young, energetic, outwardly charming, and fully able-bodied. Henry explained it was necessary for the business, now that he was managing things, and at first, Clara tried to accept it. But Cynthia quickly became more than just an assistant for Grand River Design Group. She became a constant presence at 14 Elm Street. Clara wasn't stupid. Even from her wheelchair, navigating the familiar rooms of her own home, she could see the way Henry and Cynthia looked at each other, the easy laughter shared, the inside jokes that Clara wasn't a part of, the way they stood just a little too close. It was like watching her life unfold from behind a pane of glass, separate and distant. She started to feel it deep in her gut. She was becoming an inconvenience, a burden, a reminder of the life Henry seemed eager to leave behind. Her recovery was slow and arduous, her adjustment to life in a wheelchair demanding. While she was still grappling with the enormity of her own circumstances, Henry was already taking more and more control, not just of her business and finances, but subtly, insidiously, withdrawing from their shared life. Date nights stopped, intimacy vanished. Clara's world, already shrunk by her physical limitations, was further confined by Henry's actions. Her friends, many of whom found her disability awkward to navigate, gradually stopped visiting. Henry always had a reason. Clara was too tired. The house wasn't accessible enough. She wasn't feeling up to it. He carefully managed her interactions, creating a subtle, invisible wall around her. Through it all, Clara wrestled with self-doubt. Was she being paranoid? Was her disability making her overly sensitive, overly needy? Henry certainly suggested as much, subtly planting seeds of doubt whenever she questioned him. This is classic gaslighting, making you question your own reality, your own sanity. And for a long time, it worked. Clara started to believe maybe it was her. maybe she was the problem. The isolation wasn't just physical, it was about being slowly erased from her own world, from the connections that sustained her. But Clara never suspected just how far Henry would go, how utterly complete the erasure he planned would be. The day had begun like any other. Henry left for the office early, just like he always did. Clara wheeled herself around the increasingly silent house at 14 Elm Street, trying to focus on a small freelance design project she'd managed to secure without telling Henry. It felt like a small act of defiance, a way to hold on to a piece of her former self. Then, in the late afternoon, a text message popped up on her phone. It was from Henry. "Taking you somewhere special tonight. Be ready at 7, dress warmly." After months of emotional neglect, of feeling unseen and unwanted, this unexpected gesture kindled a tiny flicker of hope in Clara's heart. Perhaps, just perhaps, Henry was finally accepting their new reality. Perhaps he wanted to reconnect, to find their way back to the closeness they once shared. It was a fragile hope, but she clung to it. When Henry returned home that evening, he seemed oddly energetic, almost overly cheerful. He helped Clara get ready, choosing a warm sweater and jacket for her. His movements felt efficient, almost clinical, lacking the gentle care she remembered, but she pushed that thought away. Focus on the positive, she told herself. As he loaded her wheelchair into their SUV, Clara noticed something else in the back, a small suitcase. "Are we going somewhere overnight?" she asked, a mix of surprise and nascent excitement bubbling up. Henry smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's a surprise," he said. "Just be patient." They drove out of Sterling Creek, leaving the familiar suburban streets behind and heading into more rural areas. Clara's initial excitement gradually gave way to confusion. This wasn't the direction for a nice dinner or a weekend getaway she could think of. Her confusion deepened, twisting into unease, when Henry turned off the main road onto a narrow, unpaved forest service road. The trees loomed large and dark on either side. Alarm bells, quiet at first, began to ring in her mind. "Henry," she said, her voice tightening. "Where are we going? There's nothing out here." His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Can't you just trust me for once without all the questions?" The harshness in his tone silenced her. The air in the car grew thick with unspoken tension. They continued driving, deeper and deeper into the dense, dark woods of Blackwood Forest. There are roads we are led down, sometimes by those we trust implicitly, that we enter without knowing they are a one-way path to somewhere we never wanted to go. What Clara didn't know, couldn't see in the gathering darkness, was that they were not alone on that road. A black pickup truck maintained a discreet distance behind them, its driver's face hidden in shadow. Its eyes, sharp and watchful, never lost sight of Henry's SUV. And this mysterious follower, on his own unexpected path, was a man who had once been a crucial part of Clara's life. What Clara didn't know, couldn't see in the gathering darkness, was that they were not alone on that road. A black pickup truck maintained a discreet distance behind them, its driver's face hidden in shadow. Its eyes, sharp and watchful, never lost sight of Henry's SUV. And this mysterious follower, on his own unexpected path, was a man who had once been a crucial part of Clara's life, an old flame, driven by a gut feeling and a decision that seemed to defy logic. This was Walter Hayes, decorated veteran, formerly Clara's college boyfriend from Ashwood University. He had recently returned to civilian life after 3 tours of duty overseas, a life marked by experiences most civilians could never fathom. Walter had been trying, slowly, tentatively, to reconnect with old friends back in the States. Clara was one of them. He'd looked her up online, found news of her accident a couple of years ago. He'd seen she was married to Henry, her college sweetheart. He'd thought about reaching out, maybe suggesting coffee, catching up, just to see how she was doing. But then, as he scrolled through social media, something felt off. There were recent posts, yes, but mostly from Henry, talking about the business, Clara's business, occasionally mentioning Clara, but rarely showing her, never showing them together in any real, personal way. It was like looking at a carefully constructed narrative, a picture with someone missing from the frame. Imagine seeing a social media feed, seemingly normal, but with an odd emptiness where Clara should be. Knowing the vibrant, independent woman Clara had been at Ashwood, this online absence, this feeling of her being somehow sidelined, didn't sit right with Walter. His military training, years spent in environments where recognizing subtle shifts in behavior could mean the difference between life and death, had honed his instincts to a razor's edge. Something was wrong. He decided to do a low-key drive-by of 14 Elm Street that evening, just to see if everything seemed okay. He'd done it a couple of times in the past few weeks, always seeing Henry coming and going, but never Clara outside. Tonight was the first time he saw her. He saw Henry helping her into the SUV. He saw Clara's expression, confused, vulnerable, and something about Henry's body language, the furtive, almost clinical way he handled the wheelchair, sent a jolt through Walter. His gut screamed danger. It was a familiar signal, one he had learned never to ignore. Without a clear plan, acting purely on instinct, Walter decided to follow. He kept a careful distance, his black pickup truck a shadow in the twilight, maintaining vigilance as Henry's SUV turned onto the narrow Forest Service road. The further they drove into the increasingly remote Blackwood Forest, the stronger Walter's unease grew. This wasn't a casual drive. This felt deliberate. His military training didn't just make him sensitive to body language, it made him sensitive to patterns, to deviations from the norm, to signs of coercion, and what he was witnessing was a massive deviation. Sometimes, the threads that connect us to the past are the very things that can pull us back from the edge of the present abyss. And that thread, in the form of Walter Hayes, had just shown up in Blackwood Forest at Clara's darkest moment. And that thread, in the form of Walter Hayes, had just shown up in Blackwood Forest at Clara's darkest moment. Henry's SUV finally pulled to a stop in a small clearing, deep within the woods. The headlights cut through the dense darkness, illuminating nothing but towering trees stretching in every direction. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Henry, you're scaring me," she whispered, the pretense of composure completely gone. "What are we doing here?" He turned off the engine. The silence that felt heavy, suffocating. He sat there for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was cold, detached. "You know, Clara, I've tried. I really have." He sighed, a sound of weariness, not regret. "But this isn't the life I signed up for." Clara's blood ran cold, deep down. A terrible understanding was beginning to dawn. "The business is struggling because of your medical bills," Henry continued, his voice flat. "We're drowning in debt. I can't keep living like this." "What are you saying, Henry?" she whispered, though the answer was already forming, a chilling shape in her mind. He got out of the car, walked around to her side. He opened her door, and the cold night air hit her face. He moved to the back of the SUV. With a rough, impatient motion, he pulled out her wheelchair and unfolded it. "I'm saying goodbye, Clara." With clinical efficiency, he transferred her from the car to the wheelchair, placing her purse in her lap. Her hands trembled as the full, horrifying reality washed over her. You can't leave me here. I'll die out here alone." Henry's face hardened, stripped of any pretense of care. "You have your phone. Maybe someone will find you." He shrugged, a small, dismissive movement. "Or maybe they won't. Either way, it's not my problem anymore." He reached back into the SUV and pulled out the small duffel bag she'd seen earlier, dropping it unceremoniously beside her wheelchair. "There's some water, a blanket, and a flashlight. That's more than you deserve after what you've put me through." "Henry, please!" Clara's voice broke, tears streaming down her face. "We can work through this. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. Just please." For a fleeting second, something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, perhaps a hint of regret. But then, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and whatever brief uncertainty was there vanished. His expression became set, hard. "Cynthia's waiting for me. We're starting over. Clara, without you." As the absolute terrifying truth of her situation crashed over her, Clara's pleas turned to screams, but they fell on deaf ears. Henry got back into the SUV, backed up, and drove away. The red glow of his taillights disappeared into the trees. She was alone, in the dark, abandoned. From his hidden position further back in the trees, Walter watched it all in stunned, cold disbelief. Years of military training had prepared him for countless horrors, for witnessing the worst of humanity in combat zones. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for watching the woman he had once loved be deliberately abandoned in a remote forest because she was disabled. As Henry's vehicle vanished, the only sound Walter could hear was the raw, heartbreaking sound of Clara's sobs echoing through the silent woods. He made his decision instantly. He would not let her die here. Not tonight, not ever, alone, in the dark. The silence of the forest pressed in on Clara, broken only by her own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of her heart. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The full horror of Henry's betrayal, the calculated cruelty of it, settled over her like a shroud. She fumbled in her lap for her phone, managing to turn on the flashlight feature, the feeble beam cutting a small circle in the overwhelming blackness. She tried to call for help, for 911, but her screen mocked her. No service. This can't be happening, she whispered, her breath misting in the cold air. He wouldn't really leave me here to die. But the empty forest offered no comfort, no denial. The cruel truth, stark and undeniable, settled deep in her soul. Her husband had abandoned her. Desperation, cold and sharp, fueled her. She had to try. She had to get back to the road, somehow. Pushing against the wheels of her chair, she attempted to move towards where she thought the road might be. But the forest floor was uneven, covered in fallen leaves and treacherous roots and branches. The wheelchair caught on a root, nearly tipping her over. A cry of frustration and fear escaped her. "Is anyone there?" she called out, the sound thin and fragile against the vastness of the woods. "Please, please help me." The forest seemed to swallow her words, returning nothing but the distant hoot of an owl and the rustle of unseen things in the leaves. Time stretched, slow and agonizing, as her panic grew. The temperature was dropping. In Henry's rush to get rid of her, he hadn't given her a chance to grab her regular medication. By morning, she knew, the pain would be unbearable, just as hopelessness began to completely overwhelm her. A sound, a twig snapping somewhere in the darkness, just beyond the reach of her phone's light. Her head jerked up. "Hello, is someone there?" Silence again, then the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching through the underbrush. Her heart leaped into her throat. Was it Henry? Had he had a change of heart, or was it something else? Something wild, something even more dangerous. "Who's there?" Her voice trembled as she aimed her phone's flashlight toward the sound. The beam caught a figure emerging from between the trees. A man, broad-shouldered and solid, his face partly shadowed by the hood of his jacket. Clara's breath hitched, fear warred with a desperate, fragile hope. The figure stepped closer. As he moved into the full beam of the flashlight, the hood fell back, revealing a face that sent a shock of recognition, of pure, stunned disbelief through Clara's entire body. "Walter!" she gasped. Standing before her was Walter Hayes. Older than when she'd last seen him, his face more weathered, his eyes carrying a weight she didn't remember. But it was unmistakably him, her college boyfriend. The man she'd once thought she might spend her life with, before their paths had diverged so completely. His voice, when he spoke her name, was deeper than she remembered, steady and calm despite the bizarre, terrifying circumstances. "Clara, are you hurt?" For a moment, she couldn't speak. The sheer improbability of his presence, here, now, rendered her speechless. Then, reality crashed back in. The dam broke. Tears streamed down her face as the words tumbled out, raw and choked with emotion. "Henry, he left me here. He's not coming back. He's with someone else now. He wanted me to die out here." Her voice broke on the last words. Walter knelt beside her wheelchair, his expression grave, controlled. Up close, Clara could see subtle changes in him, a thin scar along his jawline that hadn't been there years ago, eyes that had seen things, terrible things she couldn't imagine. "I know," he said quietly. "I saw what happened." Clara's tears paused in confusion. You saw?" Walter's jaw tightened. "I was following your car. I had a bad feeling when I saw him loading you into the SUV earlier." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I've been back in Sterling Creek for a few weeks. I wanted to look you up, see how you were doing. Then I heard about your accident and how isolated you'd become. Something didn't feel right. I was watching your house under different circumstances." Hearing this might have sounded alarming, even creepy, under any other circumstances, but at this moment, stranded and vulnerable in the dark woods, Clara could only feel a flood of gratitude. Someone, for some reason, had been concerned enough to check on her, had just driven by her house today. "Call it a soldier's instinct," Walter added, as if explaining the inexplicable. "But the way he was acting, I couldn't just drive away." Walter stood up, surveying the dark forest around them. "We need to get you somewhere warm. My truck is parked about half a mile back." Clara gestured helplessly at her wheelchair, then at the uneven, leaf-strewn forest floor. I can't exactly hike out of here. Walter nodded, his expression softening slightly. "I know. I'm going to carry you." Before Clara could protest, could voice her embarrassment, "I'm too heavy." Walter was already behind her wheelchair. He carefully placed a thick blanket from his backpack around her shoulders. "You're not too heavy," he said quietly, his voice firm but gentle. "I've carried wounded men twice your size through terrain worse than this." With gentle, practiced efficiency, he slipped one arm under her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her easily from the wheelchair, carried in his arms through the dark, silent woods. Clara was struck by the utterly surreal nature of the situation. Her husband had abandoned her to die, and now her college boyfriend, whom she hadn't seen in nearly a decade, was carrying her to safety. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice muffled against his jacket. "How did you know where Henry was taking me?" Walter navigated carefully through the trees, his movement steady despite the extra weight. "I kept a safe distance behind your SUV. When he turned onto that Forest Service road, I knew something was wrong. I parked the truck and followed on foot once you got deep enough in." He paused, adjusting his grip slightly. "I was about to intervene when he left you, but I wanted to make absolutely sure he was actually leaving first." Her mind, still reeling, raced with questions. "Why are you even in Sterling Creek last I heard? You were deployed overseas." Walter's expression tightened, almost imperceptibly. 3 tours of duty. I got out 6 months ago. Came back to the States, did some private security work for a while, then decided to come back to Sterling Creek to settle some unfinished business. Something in his tone, something in his eyes, made Clara wonder what kind of unfinished business would bring him back here, now, after all these years. But she was too exhausted, too overwhelmed by the night's events, to press further. Sometimes, the threads that connect us to the past are the very things that can pull us back from the edge of the present abyss. And that thread, in the form of Walter, had appeared in Blackwood Forest at Clara's moment of greatest need. He wasn't just a light in the darkness. He was the only bridge strong enough to carry her out. Walter carried Clara steadily through the trees until they emerged onto a narrow dirt road. There, barely visible in the darkness, was the black pickup truck that had been following them. "Almost there," he said, his breath slightly labored from the exertion, but his voice still calm. He managed to open the passenger door one-handed and gently placed Clara on the seat, making sure the blanket was secure around her shoulders. "Thank you, Walter," Clara whispered, the full impact of what might have happened, of her narrow escape thanks to his intervention, beginning to sink in. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there." Walter's expression was unreadable as he closed her door and walked around to the driver's side. "Let's get you somewhere safe," he said. "Then we can figure out what to do next." As the truck's engine rumbled to life and the headlights illuminated the narrow forest road, heading deeper into the woods rather than back towards Sterling Creek, Clara found herself wondering what next could possibly look like. Her husband had just tried to murder her by abandonment. She had no wheelchair, no medication, and was now in the company of an ex-boyfriend she hadn't seen in years, who had apparently been watching her house and following her car. Under any other circumstances, she might have been terrified. But as she glanced at Walter's stoic profile, illuminated intermittently by the dashboard lights, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Safe. "Where are we going?" she asked suddenly, realizing she had no idea where Walter was taking her. "I have a cabin about 20 minutes from here," he replied, his eyes fixed on the difficult road ahead. "It's isolated, but it has everything we need: heat, running water, first aid supplies." "You have a cabin in these woods?" Clara couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Walter nodded. "Bought it when I got back from my last tour. Needed somewhere quiet, away from people." He paused. "Somewhere to heal." The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Clara studied his profile more carefully, noting the tension in his jaw, the careful control in his movements that suggested he was a man accustomed to containing something powerful within himself. "Walter, what happened to you?" "After we broke up?" she asked. For a long moment, he was silent. Clara thought he might not answer. Then he spoke, his voice measured. "I did what I planned to do, joined special forces. Saw action in places I'm still not allowed to talk about. Did things I wish I could forget." He took a deep breath. "About a year ago, an operation went bad. Lost some good men. Got injured pretty badly myself." He briefly touched his side, a gesture so quick Clara almost missed it. "They patched me up, gave me some medals, then decided I'd done enough. Honorable discharge. Sent me home to figure out what happens next." He hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Turns out, that's harder than it sounds." Clara absorbed this information, hearing both what he said and what remained unspoken. The principled, slightly idealistic boy she'd known in college had become a man shaped by combat and loss. Yet, here he was, still stepping in to help someone in need, still putting himself at risk for others. "I'm sorry," she said softly, not sure if she was apologizing for asking, or for the hardships he'd endured. Walter's expression softened slightly. "Don't be. We all make our choices." He glanced at her briefly. "Like Henry made his tonight." The mention of her husband's name brought the horrifying reality crashing back. Clara's hands began to shake as the enormity of what had happened threatened to overwhelm her. "He tried to kill me," she whispered, the words sounding unreal even as she spoke them. "My husband brought me to the middle of nowhere and left me to die. Because I'm disabled, because I became inconvenient." Walter's voice was gentle, but firm. "Yes, he did, and he needs to be held accountable for that." "How?" Clara asked, despair coloring her voice. "It's my word against his. He'll say I asked to go for a drive, that we had an argument, and I told him to leave me alone for a while, that he came back and I was gone." She laughed bitterly. Who would believe that a successful businessman would abandon his disabled wife in the woods? "I would," Walter said simply. "I saw it happen. And I imagine there's more to the story, things that happened before tonight that show a pattern." Clara was quiet, thinking about the months of emotional abuse, the isolation, the gradual takeover of her finances and business. "There is," she admitted, "but I'm not sure it's enough." Walter turned the truck onto an even narrower path, barely visible among the trees. "Let's focus on getting you safe and comfortable tonight. Tomorrow, we can start figuring out how to make him pay for what he's done." The word pay hung in the air, carrying an edge that made Clara glance sharply at Walter. There was something in his tone, a controlled anger, a precision to his words that reminded her that this man had been trained to eliminate threats. "Walter," she said carefully, "whatever we do, it has to be legal. I don't want revenge that puts either of us in jail." The truck slowed as they approached a small clearing in the headlights. Clara could make out a rustic cabin built of dark wood with a stone chimney. It looked solid and well-maintained, if deliberately isolated from the world. Walter put the truck in park and turned to face her fully for the first time since he'd rescued her. "I promise you, Clara," he said, "Henry will face justice for what he's done. Legal justice." His eyes, however, held a determination that suggested he had very specific ideas about what that justice might entail. Walter carried her into the cabin and got her settled on a comfortable couch near a wood stove. Clara was struck by the strange twist her life had taken. Just a few hours ago, she had been a trapped, diminished version of herself, enduring a loveless marriage. Now, she was in a forest cabin with a man from her past, a man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and stepped in without hesitation, a man who, she was beginning to suspect, had never fully let her go. The cabin was surprisingly comfortable inside, clean, well-organized, with a functional if sparse aesthetic. Military precision was evident in the way everything had its place. Walter efficiently built a fire in the wood stove, the warmth quickly spreading through the main room. "Are you hungry?" he asked, moving to a small kitchenette. "I don't have much, but I can make soup. Sandwiches?" Clara nodded, suddenly aware of the hollow feeling in her stomach. "Whatever's easiest." As Walter moved around the kitchen, Clara took the opportunity to really look at him. He was broader than she remembered, more solid, his movements economical and purposeful. The boy she'd dated in college had been replaced by a man who carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced true danger and survived. So she said, trying to process the bizarre turn her life had taken. "You bought a cabin in the same forest where my husband decided to abandon me. That's quite a coincidence." Walter glanced over his shoulder as he stirred something on the small stove. "It is, though these woods cover hundreds of acres, so the odds of him choosing a spot near my cabin were actually pretty slim." He paused. "I chose this area because it's quiet, private, good for someone who needs to readjust to civilian life, and you just happened to drive by my house today." After all these years, Walter was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider his words carefully. "I've been back in Sterling Creek for 2 months, been doing some consulting work, trying to figure out my next steps." He turned to face her. "About 3 weeks ago, I looked you up online, found out about your accident, saw that you were married. I was going to reach out, maybe get coffee, catch up. But," Clara prompted, sensing there was more. "But when I checked your social media, something felt off. No recent posts from you, just Henry occasionally posting about what a trooper you were." His expression darkened. "I've seen how people can use social media to create a narrative that hides what's really happening. And knowing what you were like in college, independent, vibrant, it didn't add up that you'd just disappear online." He returned to the stove, pouring soup into bowls. "So yes, I drove by your house a couple times, saw Henry coming and going, never saw you outside. Today was the first time I saw you, and something about the way he was handling you." He shook his head. "Military training makes you sensitive to certain things. Body language, signs of coercion. I trust my instincts." "And your instincts," Clara finished, a small, dry smile forming. "Told you to follow us into the forest." Walter set a bowl of soup on the coffee table in front of her, along with a spoon and some crackers. "My instincts told me something was wrong. Following was a judgment call." He met her eyes directly. "One I'm glad I made." Clara couldn't argue with that. She picked up the soup bowl, breathing in the warm, comforting smell. "Thank you. Thank you for following us, for being here." Walter sat in an armchair across from her, his own bowl in hand. "You don't need to thank me for basic human decency, Clara." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional clink of spoons. Clara's mind was racing, trying to process everything that had happened and what might come next. "Henry will report me missing," she said finally. "Once he realizes someone might have seen him in the forest, he'll spin some story about how I disappeared." Walter nodded thoughtfully. "Probably, which means we need to be strategic about our next steps." "I need to go to the police," Clara said. "Tell them what happened." "We will," Walter agreed. "But first, we need to gather evidence. Your word against his might not be enough, especially if he's already creating a false narrative." Clara felt a flash of frustration. What kind of evidence can we possibly get? It happened in the middle of nowhere, in the dark. Walter set his empty bowl aside and leaned forward. "You'd be surprised what can be used as evidence. Text messages, financial records showing his control over your accounts, witnesses who might have seen his behavior change after your accident. He paused. And my testimony about what I saw tonight. Would that be enough? Maybe, Walter said. Maybe not. But before we go to the police, we should try to gather as much as possible. Walter's expression was thoughtful. Do you have access to your bank accounts, your emails, financial records? Clara shook her head. Henry changed all my passwords after the accident, said it was to protect me while I recovered. She laughed bitterly. She realized now he was isolating her, taking control bit by bit. That's financial abuse, Walter said, and it's actually helpful for building a case. He paused. Clara, do you remember any of your old passwords or have any accounts he might not know about? Clara thought carefully. I have an old email account from college that I'm pretty sure still works, and my parents left me some money in a separate account that Henry might not know about. I never touched it because we didn't need the money. Walter nodded approvingly. That's good. Tomorrow, we can start looking into those, see what kind of paper trail Henry has left. He hesitated. Clara, I need to ask you something. When you go back, and eventually you will have to, what do you want to happen? The question caught her off guard. I don't know. Both. I think I want him to face consequences for what he did. But mostly, I want my life back, my independence. Then that's what we'll focus on, Walter said firmly. Getting you free, safely, with the resources you need to rebuild. Clara was struck by his clarity, his focus on practical steps forward, rather than dwelling on the horror of what had happened. It was exactly what she needed at this moment, not pity, but partnership, and finding a solution. Thank you, she said again, feeling tears threaten to rise. I still can't believe you found me, that you were there when I needed someone most. Walter's expression softened. Maybe it wasn't just coincidence. Maybe it was unfinished business. The phrase he'd used earlier hung between them, weighted with history and unspoken feelings. Clara remembered their college breakup, painful but necessary. They'd both believed, at the time, she'd wanted stability, a predictable future, and he'd been drawn to danger, to serving a cause greater than himself. Walter, she said carefully, why did you really come looking for me after all these years? He was quiet for a long moment, the firelight playing across his features, highlighting the new lines around his eyes, the slight gray at his temples that hadn't been there in college. When you're in combat, he finally said, you learn to focus on the mission, on staying alive. You don't have time to think about regrets or what-ifs. He stared into the fire. But when it's quiet, when the mission is over, those thoughts come back. He met her eyes. And one of mine was always you. Clara. Clara felt her heart quicken. Me. Walter nodded slowly. I respected our decision to break up. We wanted different things. He paused. But after everything I've seen and done, I started wondering what my life might have been like, if I'd made different choices. His eyes held hers. If we had made different choices. The weight of those words settled between them, a bridge spanning the years and experiences that had shaped them both into different people than they once were. I'm not the same person I was in college, Walter, Clara said softly. Even before the accident, and after everything changes when your body betrays you, I'm not the same either. War changes you, Clara, Walter responded. Seeing death up close changes you. He leaned forward. But some things don't change. Like how I feel when I look at you, even now, even after everything. Clara felt a complex mix of emotions, surprise, warmth, confusion. Her life had been upended in a matter of hours. And here was Walter, a ghost from her past, speaking words that stirred something she'd thought long buried. I can't think about that right now, she said honestly. Everything is too raw, too confusing. Walter nodded immediately. Of course, that was inappropriate timing on my part. He stood up, taking their empty bowls. You need rest, not complications. As he moved toward the kitchen, Clara caught his wrist gently. I didn't say it was unwelcome, just, not now, not yet. Their eyes held for a moment, an understanding passing between them. Then Walter nodded and continued to the kitchen. "The bedroom is through that door," he said, gesturing to a door off the main room. "I changed the sheets this morning, so they're clean. I'll take the couch." Clara frowned. "Walter, this is your home. I can't take your bed." "You can and you will," he said firmly. His tone softened. "You've been through hell today. You need proper rest. Please, Clara, let me do this for you." Too exhausted to argue further, Clara nodded. Do you have a t-shirt? A shirt I could borrow to sleep in?" Walter disappeared into the bedroom and returned with a soft gray t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants. "These will be too big, but they're clean." "Thank you." Clara took the clothes, then hesitated. "I'll need help getting to the bathroom, changing." A flash of understanding crossed Walter's face. "Of course, just tell me what you need." With patient dignity, Walter helped Clara to the bathroom, waited outside while she used the facilities, then helped her change into the borrowed clothes. His movements were clinical, respectful, focused entirely on her comfort rather than her disability. It was a striking contrast to Henry's increasingly impatient assistance over the past year. Once Clara was settled in the comfortable bed, Walter lingered in the doorway. "If you need anything in the night, water, medication, help getting to the bathroom, just call out. I'm a light sleeper." Clara nodded, already feeling sleep tugging at her. "Walter?" "Yes. Why do you have a cabin that's accessible for someone with mobility issues?" She'd noticed the wider doorways, the grab bars in the bathroom, features that made Walter's cabin surprisingly navigable for someone in her condition. A shadow crossed his face. "I told you I was injured on my last tour." He paused. "The doctors weren't sure if I'd walk again. I had the cabin modified while I was still in rehab, preparing for all possibilities." Clara processed this new information. "But you recovered." "I was lucky," Walter said simply. "Others weren't." He stepped back from the doorway. "Get some rest. Clara, tomorrow, we start figuring out how to get your life back." As the door closed softly behind him, Clara lay in the darkness, her mind replaying the extraordinary events of the day. Her husband had abandoned her to die. Her college boyfriend had saved her life. And somehow, improbably, she felt safer than she had in months. With that strange comfort surrounding her, Clara drifted into an exhausted sleep, unaware that the battle for her future was just beginning. In the darkest moments, sometimes the light doesn't come from where you expect it. Walter wasn't just the light, he was the bridge that carried Clara out of Blackwood Forest, bringing her to safety and the start of a fight to reclaim her life. The next morning dawned clear and cold over Blackwood Forest. Clara woke, disoriented for a moment, sunlight streaming through the unfamiliar curtains of the Pine Ridge cabin. Panic seized her. Where was she? Then, the events of the previous night came rushing back, Henry abandoning her, Walter appearing like some guardian angel, bringing her here. The smell of coffee drifted through the door, along with the sound of quiet movement. Clara pushed herself up against the headboard, wincing at the stiffness in her body. Without her regular medication, the chronic pain that accompanied her paralysis was making itself known. "Walter!" she called out, her voice rough with sleep. The door opened almost immediately. Walter stood there, already dressed in jeans and a simple Henley, a mug of coffee in his hand. "Morning," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was abandoned in a forest and slept in strange clothes," Clara replied, managing a small smile despite everything. "But alive," which is more than Henry planned for. Walter's expression darkened momentarily at the mention of Henry, but he quickly schooled his features. "I made coffee," he said, "and I found some painkillers in the bathroom cabinet. Not prescription strength, but they might help." "Thank you," Clara said, genuinely touched by his thoughtfulness. I hate to ask, but I need help getting to the bathroom." Without hesitation or awkwardness, Walter helped her. Then he helped her to the couch in the main room, where he had already arranged pillows for her comfort. The domesticity of the scene, coffee waiting, a fire crackling in the wood stove, felt strangely intimate given the circumstances. "I went back for your wheelchair while you were sleeping," Walter said, handing her a mug of coffee. "It's on the porch, needs cleaning, but it's intact." Clara felt a surge of gratitude. "You didn't have to do that." "You need it," he replied simply. And I figured you might want these too. He placed her purse beside her on the couch. My purse did you go back to? Walter nodded. First light, wanted to make sure I hadn't missed anything that could help us. Clara opened her purse with trembling hands. Everything was there, her phone, her wallet, the emergency medication she kept for breakthrough pain. Walter, thank you. I can't even... You don't need to thank me, he cut in gently. Anyone would have done the same. No, Clara said firmly. They wouldn't. Most people would have called 911 and kept driving. You followed your instincts. You carried me through a dark forest. You're giving me shelter. She met his eyes directly. You saved my life. Walter? Walter seemed uncomfortable with her gratitude, shifting slightly where he stood. Let's focus on what happens next. Have you checked your phone? Any messages from Henry? Clara reached for her phone, bracing herself. It had died last night in the forest. Walter found a charger compatible with her phone, and they waited in intense silence as it powered back on. When it finally did, a cascade of notifications appeared. 10 missed calls from Henry, 5 voicemails, 15 text messages. He's been busy, Walter observed, his voice carefully neutral. Clara's hand shook as she opened the first text message, time-stamped from shortly after he abandoned her. Clara, I'm sorry it came to this, but you have to understand. The strain your condition has put on our marriage. Cynthia makes me happy in ways you no longer can. I hope someday you'll forgive me. Bastard, Walter muttered, reading over her shoulder. He's already crafting his narrative. The next several messages followed a similar theme: justifications, half apologies that placed the blame squarely on Clara and her disability. Then, around midnight, the tone changed. Clara, where are you? I came back to the clearing and you were gone. This isn't funny. And then, growing increasingly frantic, who helped you? Someone must have helped you. Where are you? I'm calling the police if you don't answer me. Please, Clara, whatever you're planning, we can talk about this. Don't ruin both our lives. The final message, sent just an hour ago. I've reported you missing. The police are looking for you. I told them you were depressed, that you might harm yourself. Come home, Clara, before this gets worse. Clara felt physically ill reading the messages. He was trying to make it sound like she had disappeared voluntarily, like she was mentally unstable. Walter's face had hardened into a mask of controlled fury. He's covering his tracks, making sure that if you do show up and accuse him, he's already planted seeds of doubt about your mental state. He reported me missing, Clara whispered. The police are looking for me. Let them look, Walter said firmly. We need time to gather evidence before you reappear. If you go back now, with just your word against his, he'll spin it as a confused, depressed woman who wandered off. Clara knew he was right, but the thought of being considered a missing person, of police resources being used to search for her when she was safe, made her deeply uncomfortable. What about the voicemails? Walter prompted. Clara played the first one on speaker. Henry's voice filled the cabin, tearful and seemingly desperate. Clara, baby, please call me back. I know we've had problems, but disappearing isn't the answer. I'm worried sick. Please, just let me know you're safe. Oscar-worthy performance, Walter commented dryly. The remaining voicemails followed the same pattern, Henry playing the role of concerned husband, increasingly frantic about his missing wife, subtly weaving in mentions of her fragile emotional state and difficulty accepting her new limitations. He's good, Clara said numbly. Really good. Anyone hearing these would think he's genuinely worried about his mentally unstable wife. Walter sat beside her on the couch, his expression grave. Clara, I need to ask you something important. When you go back, and eventually you will have to, what do you want to happen? Clara considered the question carefully. I want my freedom. I want control of my finances back. I want a divorce. She paused, then added with quiet intensity. And I want him to face consequences for what he did to me. Walter nodded. Then we need to be strategic. If you simply return and tell your story, it becomes a he said, she said situation. He's already establishing his version of events. So what do? We gather evidence, Walter said. Build a case that's so strong, the police have to take action. He hesitated. And we might need help, professional help. Walter reached for his own phone. I know someone, a former military colleague who works in private investigation now. His name is Frank Peterson. He specializes in domestic abuse cases. He can help us document everything properly. Maybe even get access to financial records you can't reach. Clara felt a flicker of hope. You? You do that. Get someone else involved for me. Walter's expression softened. Clara, I do a lot more than that to make sure you're safe and Henry faces justice. He paused. But first, let's try to access whatever accounts you still can. You mentioned an old email account. For the next hour, they worked methodically. Clara managed to log into her old college email account, which led to recovering access to a cloud storage account where she'd once backed up important documents. Most were outdated, but they found copies of her original business paperwork, some financial statements from before her accident, and emails from clients that proved she had been the true owner and creative force behind her design business. This is good, Walter said, reviewing the documents. It establishes a baseline, shows that you were competent and successful before the accident, that the business was unquestionably yours. Clara nodded, then winced as pain shot through her back. The over-the-counter painkillers were wearing off, and her body was protesting the trauma of the previous night and the lack of her prescription medication. Walter noticed immediately. You're in pain? What do you need? My regular meds are at home, Clara said. I have an emergency dose in my purse, but after that, Walter made a quick decision. Take what you have, now. My friend Frank, the investigator I mentioned, he can pick up some supplies when he comes. I'll call him. Walter stepped outside to make the call, giving Clara privacy as she took her medication. Through the window, she could see him pacing as he talked, his free hand gesturing occasionally, his posture rigid. Whatever he was saying, he was intense about it. When he returned, his expression was resolute. Frank will be here by early afternoon. He's bringing some equipment and supplies, including a wheelchair-accessible vehicle so we can move you if necessary. He hesitated. He's also bringing a legal contact, someone who specializes in both disability rights and domestic abuse cases. Beverly Jenkins. Clara felt overwhelmed by the speed at which things were moving. Walter, this is a lot. I can't afford to pay private investigators and lawyers right now. Not with Henry controlling all our accounts. Walter's gaze was steady. Don't worry about that. Frank owes me his life, literally, and he has connections who work pro bono for cases like yours. He sat beside her again. Clara, what Henry did to you, it's not just about you. Men like that don't stop. They just get better at hiding it. Helping you isn't just about our past. It's about making sure he can't do this to anyone else. The conviction in his voice stirred something in Clara. A sense that perhaps her nightmare could serve a greater purpose, that her suffering might prevent someone else's. Okay, she agreed. What do we do until Frank arrives? We need to document everything while it's fresh. Walter replied, start from the beginning. When did things change after your accident? When did Henry start taking control? Every detail you can remember could be important. Clara took a deep breath and began to talk. She described how supportive Henry had seemed immediately after the accident, how he'd handled everything while she was in the hospital. Then, the subtle shift, suggestions that became commands, help that became control, love that became obligation. He changed her phone password first, she recalled, said it was to help her because her fingers weren't as dexterous after the hospitalization, then her email, for the same reason, then her banking apps. Walter typed notes as she spoke, occasionally asking clarifying questions. His approach was methodical, almost clinical, which helped Clara maintain her composure as she detailed the systematic dismantling of her independence. He isolated me from my friends too, she continued. Always had a reason why they couldn't visit, or why I couldn't go out. Too tired, too much stress, not accessible enough. Eventually, people stopped calling. What about family? Walter asked. Clara's expression clouded. My parents died 3 years ago. Car accident. I have a brother in Seattle, but we've never been close. Henry discouraged me from burdening him with my problems. She described when Cynthia entered the picture, About 6 months after her accident, Henry hired her as an assistant for her business, but she quickly became more like his assistant, always at the house, always hovering around him. I knew something was happening between them. Clara's voice hardened. The way they looked at each other, the inside jokes. I confronted Henry once, and he made me feel crazy for suggesting it. Said my disability was making me paranoid and insecure. Walter's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice neutral. Classic gaslighting, making you doubt your own perceptions. It worked, Clara admitted. I started thinking maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was just jealous because she could walk, dance, be normal. There's nothing abnormal about you, Clara, Walter said firmly. Your disability doesn't make you less. It never did. The conviction in his voice brought unexpected tears to Clara's eyes. After months of diminishment, of being treated as a burden, his simple affirmation of her worth felt like rain on parched earth. They continued this process for hours, Clara recounting incidents, conversations, patterns of behavior. Walter documented everything, occasionally offering insights from his knowledge of abusive dynamics. By the time they heard a vehicle approaching the cabin, they had compiled a comprehensive timeline of Henry's escalating control and abuse. That'll be Frank, Walter said, standing. Let me go meet him. Clara watched through the window as Walter greeted two people. A tall, lean man with close-cropped hair who moved with the same precise economy as Walter. That must be Frank Peterson. And a woman in her 40s with a sensible bob and an air of no-nonsense competence, Beverly Jenkins. Walter led them inside, making introductions. Clara, this is Frank Peterson, the friend I mentioned, and this is Beverly Jenkins, an attorney specializing in domestic abuse cases. Frank Peterson had the weathered look of someone who'd seen hard things, but hadn't lost his humanity in the process. He approached Clara with a respectful nod, not offering a handshake until she extended her hand first. Miss Bennett, he said, Walter filled me in on the basics. I want you to know that what happened to you was criminal, and I'm here to help make sure there are consequences. Beverly Jenkins was more formal, but equally direct. Miss Bennett, I've handled dozens of cases involving financial abuse and domestic violence against disabled partners. What you've experienced follows a pattern. We can document and address legally. Clara was struck by how neither of them questioned her story or expressed doubt. There was no pity in their assessments, just professional determination to address a wrong. I've brought some medical supplies, Frank said, indicating a duffel bag. Walter mentioned you need prescription medication. I have contacts who can help with that, but I need to know exactly what you require. Clara provided details of her medication. Beverly set up a laptop on the small dining table and began reviewing the notes Walter had compiled. This is a good start, she said approvingly, but we need more: bank statements, text message histories, email exchanges, anything that shows the pattern of control. She looked at Clara directly. And we need to address the immediate issue you've been reported missing, and police resources are being used to search for you. Safe for now. But the battle was just beginning. In the biggest battles, we're never truly alone if we dare to speak up and seek help. And that help didn't just come in the form of people. It also came from the silent evidence Henry had left behind, the proof of his calculated betrayal. Safe for now. But the battle was just beginning. And the first move in that battle involved facing the man who had abandoned her, even if only through the cold distance of a phone call. Henry, it turned out, was putting on quite a performance. As Beverly explained, there were two immediate options regarding Henry reporting Clara missing. 1, you contact the police immediately, report what actually happened, and file charges against your husband for attempted murder. Which would be my preference, Walter muttered, his voice low. Beverly gave him a level look before continuing. Or 2, we continue gathering evidence for another 24 hours while maintaining your missing status. Then approach the police with a comprehensive case that's much harder for Henry to dismiss. Won't staying missing make me look worse? Clara asked, feeling overwhelmed by the complexity. Like I'm really unstable or trying to punish Henry. Possibly, Beverly acknowledged, but it also gives us time to secure evidence that might disappear once Henry knows you're pursuing legal action. She paused. There's also a third option: we contact a specific detective I trust, explain the situation confidentially, and get their guidance on how to proceed. Frank nodded. I know who she's thinking of. Detective Susan Ramirez. She specializes in domestic violence cases, has a solid understanding of disability issues too. Clara considered her options, aware that whatever she decided would shape everything that followed. Part of her wanted to call the police immediately, to end the farce of being considered a missing person. But another part, the part that had suffered months of gaslighting and manipulation, feared that, without solid evidence, Henry would continue to control the narrative. I think we should contact Detective Ramirez, she decided finally. Get professional guidance before making our next move. Beverly nodded approvingly. I'll make the call. In the meantime, Frank can help us access your financial records and any digital evidence that might support your case. As Beverly stepped outside to make her call, Frank set up sophisticated-looking equipment on the coffee table. Walter mentioned you have an old account your husband might not know about, Frank asked Clara. Clara nodded. A trust account from my parents. I never mentioned it to Henry because we didn't need the money. Perfect, Frank said. Let's start there. If we can establish that account as legally yours alone, we can use it to fund your immediate needs without tipping Henry off. While Frank worked on accessing Clara's financial information, Walter brought her a sandwich and more water. His attention to her comfort was unwavering. There was something both strange and comforting about seeing these three people, one from her past, two complete strangers, working so determinedly on her behalf. Walter, she said quietly, when they had a moment alone. Why are they doing this? Why are you all helping me so intensely? Walter considered her question seriously. For Frank, it's partly because he owes me, but mainly because he's built his post-military career around helping people who've been victimized. Beverly takes cases like yours because she believes in justice. He paused as the door opened and Beverly returned, interrupting whatever Walter had been about to say. Beverly's expression was purposeful. I spoke with Detective Ramirez. She wants to meet you today. Preferably, she's willing to come here, off the record, to assess the situation before making anything official. Clara glanced around the cabin. Won't that compromise Walter somehow? I don't care about that, Walter said firmly. What matters is your safety and building your case. Detective Ramirez suggested that staying missing for a bit longer might actually work in our favor. Beverly continued. It gives Henry more rope to hang himself with, so to speak. The more he fabricates about your mental state and disappearance, the more thoroughly we can disprove his narrative. When will she come? Clara asked. Late afternoon, Beverly replied, which gives us a few hours to gather as much evidence as possible. She turned to Frank. Any luck with the financial accounts? Frank looked up from his computer with a grim smile. Oh, I've got access, and what I'm seeing is textbook financial abuse. He turned the screen so Clara could see. Your husband didn't just take control of your accounts. Clara, he's been systematically draining them and moving assets into accounts only he can access. Clara stared at the screen, a cold feeling settling in her stomach as she saw the evidence of Henry's betrayal laid out in neat digital columns. He was planning this, she whispered, the abandonment. He was preparing for it, financially. Yes, Frank confirmed. Based on these transfers, he's been planning to get rid of you for at least 3 months. Walter's expression darkened dangerously. The more I learn about your husband, the more I... Beverly cut in sharply. Walter, we're building a legal case here. Your personal feelings, however justified, aren't helpful right now. Walter took a deep breath, visibly reining himself in. You're right. I apologize. Clara was struck by the intensity of his reaction, by how personally he seemed to be taking Henry's betrayal. It raised questions about his feelings that she wasn't ready to address, not with so much else happening. What about my business? She asked instead. Can we prove that Henry essentially stole it from me? Frank nodded. The documents from your cloud storage help establish your ownership, and I'm finding emails where Henry explicitly represented himself as you to clients. That's fraud. A growing sense of validation filled Clara. As tangible evidence of Henry's crimes accumulated for months, she had doubted herself, wondering if she was indeed becoming paranoid and unstable, as Henry suggested. Now, others were confirming what she had sensed but couldn't prove, that she had been the victim of calculated systematic abuse. "We should also document your physical condition," Beverly suggested. "The fact that you were abandoned without medication, without your wheelchair, in weather that could have led to hypothermia. That's attempted murder, regardless of his claims about your mental state." The afternoon continued in this vein, methodical gathering of evidence, preparation of documentation, and strategic planning. Through it all, Walter remained a steady presence at Clara's side, anticipating her needs, supporting her when painful memories surfaced. His quiet strength was a counterpoint to the clinical approach of Frank and Beverly. By late afternoon, they had assembled a compelling case financial record showing Henry's systematic theft, email evidence of his fraudulent representation of himself as Clara to her clients, text messages documenting his psychological manipulation, and medical records confirming the severity of Clara's condition and her dependence on regular medication. As the sun began to set, a discreet knock at the door announced Detective Susan Ramirez. She was a compact woman with intelligent eyes and an air of contained competence. She entered the cabin, taking in the scene with a quick, assessing gaze before focusing on Clara. "Miss Bennett," she said, approaching with a professional but compassionate demeanor. "I understand you've been through a traumatic experience." Clara nodded, suddenly emotional at being addressed by a law enforcement officer who wasn't immediately doubting her story. "Thank you for coming, Detective," she managed, "and for keeping this unofficial for now." "Call me Susan," she replied, taking a seat across from Clara. "Miss Jenkins briefed me on the basics, but I'd like to hear directly from you what happened last night." With as much composure as she could muster, Clara recounted the events: Henry driving her into the forest, his cold abandonment, Walter's rescue. Susan listened without interruption, her face revealing nothing, though her eyes hardened slightly as Clara described being left without her wheelchair or medication. "And you witnessed this, Mr. Hayes?" Susan asked, turning to Walter. "Yes," Walter confirmed. "I followed their vehicle because I was concerned about Clara's welfare. I observed Henry Dalton deliberately abandoning his disabled wife in a remote location at night, in cool weather, with minimal supplies. He made statements clearly indicating he hoped she would not survive." Susan nodded, making notes. "And your relationship to Miss Bennett?" "We dated in college," Walter replied simply. "We hadn't been in contact for years until yesterday. So you just happened to be following her car the night her husband decided to abandon her in the woods near your cabin." Susan's tone was neutral, but the question was pointed. "It sounds improbable." "I know," Walter acknowledged. "But I had legitimate concerns based on what I'd observed of Henry's behavior. I can provide a detailed statement explaining my actions and observations." Susan turned back to Clara. "Miss Bennett, your husband has reported you missing. He's giving media interviews, portraying himself as desperately worried. He's claiming you've been struggling with depression since your accident, that you've made comments about being a burden and wanting to end it all." Clara felt sick. That was a complete fabrication. If anyone was depressed about her condition, it was Henry. "I believe you, Miss Bennett," Susan said simply. "And the evidence your team has gathered is compelling. The financial records alone suggest premeditation." She leaned forward. "But I need to be clear about what you want to happen next. Do you want to pursue criminal charges against your husband for attempted murder, financial fraud? Both?" The question hung in the air, weighty with implication. Clara considered it carefully, aware that her answer would set in motion events that couldn't be undone. "I want justice," she said finally. "I want him charged with everything he's done, the financial theft, the fraud, and yes, the attempted murder. But most importantly, I want to be safe, and I want my life back." Susan nodded. "Then, here's what I propose. You remain missing until tomorrow morning. That gives us time to secure warrants based on the evidence you've provided. My team will execute those warrants at your home and Henry's office simultaneously, securing additional evidence before he can destroy it." She paused. "Then you appear, not at home, but at the police station with me." ready to give a formal statement. That makes sense. Clara agreed, though the thought of remaining officially missing for another night made her uncomfortable. What about her medication? Walter asked. She has enough for tonight, Susan assured him. But she needs her regular prescriptions. I can arrange that. I'll have an officer collect them from your pharmacy and deliver them here tonight, discreetly. They spent another hour reviewing details with Susan, asking pointed questions about Henry's behavior, his relationship with Cynthia, and the events leading up to the abandonment. By the time she left, Clara felt both exhausted and strangely empowered. For the first time since her accident, people in authority were taking her seriously, believing her account without question. As the door closed behind Detective Ramirez, Beverly gave Clara a small, satisfied smile. You did well. She's fully invested now. Will it be enough? Clara asked. Will Henry actually face consequences? The financial crimes are clear-cut, Frank said, shutting down his equipment. The attempted murder charge is harder to prove. But with Walter's testimony and the evidence of premeditation from the financial records, there's a solid case. Beverly nodded agreement. And I'll be filing for emergency orders first thing tomorrow, freezing any remaining assets, securing your access to the house and business accounts, and a restraining order against Henry. The professional efficiency with which they discussed dismantling her husband's schemes was both comforting and surreal. Just 24 hours ago, Clara had been trapped in what she now recognized as an abusive marriage, her independence systematically stripped away. Now, she was at the center of a coordinated effort to reclaim her life and hold her abuser accountable. As Frank and Beverly prepared to leave, promising to return in the morning to accompany Clara to the police station, Walter walked them out to their car. Through the window, Clara could see them engaged in intense conversation, Beverly occasionally glancing back toward the cabin with a concerned expression. When Walter returned, his face was carefully composed, but Clara sensed tension beneath the surface. What was that about? She asked. Walter hesitated, then sighed. Beverly is concerned about my involvement in your case. She thinks my history with you, and my reaction to what Henry did, might complicate the legal proceedings. My reaction? You mean saving my life? No, Walter said, sitting across from her. His hands clenched briefly. She means the fact that I clearly want to do a lot more than just see Henry arrested. I've been in war zones. Clara, I've seen people do terrible things to each other. But what Henry did to you, the calculated cruelty of it. He shook his head. Beverly's worried I might take matters into my own hands if the legal system doesn't deliver justice. Clara studied him, seeing the controlled anger in his posture, the protective intensity in his eyes. Would you? No, he said after a moment. Not because Henry doesn't deserve it, but because it would hurt you more than help you. He met her gaze directly. I didn't find you after all these years just to leave you alone again, by doing something stupid. The simple honesty of his statement touched something deep within Clara. This man, who had once been the love of her young life, who had then become a stranger forged in war, was still somehow capable of putting her welfare above his own instincts for justice or revenge. Sometimes, the biggest lies crumble when faced with the truth, spoken with quiet courage. That phone call was a turning point. It was the drop that caused the dam to break, leading inevitably to the next step facing justice. With Henry Dalton's calculated performance crumbling, and the truth exposed in that phone call, the time had come for justice to take its course. The system, like any large machine, could be slow, but it was, indeed, working. Frank and Beverly returned to the Pine Ridge cabin the next morning, bringing with them Helen Taylor, a victim's advocate with the Sterling Creek District Attorney's Office. Helen was a compact woman with kind eyes and a calming presence. Imagine seeing the three arrive, a picture of quiet competence and support. Miss Bennett, Helen said, her voice warm and professional. I'm here to support you today, and in the weeks ahead. Whatever you need, explanations of legal procedures, accommodations for your disability, emotional support. That's what I'm here for. Clara felt a surge of gratitude for this network of support that had materialized seemingly out of nowhere. They spent the morning at the cabin, preparing Clara for the formal statement she would give at the Sterling Creek Police Department. Detective Ramirez had made it very clear Henry was in custody. Apprehended shortly after Clara's phone call exposed his lies and manipulations. While Henry is behind bars for now, Beverly explained, his attorney, Carter Blackwell, is already making noise. Blackwell is notorious in Sterling Creek legal circles, ruthless, well-connected, and known for getting high-profile clients acquitted through aggressive and often questionable tactics. Clara's stomach clenched. He's trying to set the stage for a mental competency challenge, Beverly continued, a grim look on her face. Suggesting that your trauma from the accident has affected your perception of reality. Walter's posture stiffened. That's absurd. Clara's disability is physical, not cognitive. It's a tactic, not reality, Beverly assured them. But we need to be prepared for an ugly fight. Blackwell will try to paint Henry as the devoted husband dealing with a mentally unstable wife. Clara straightened in her wheelchair, a resolve hardening within her. Let him try, she said, her voice steady. We have the evidence, we have the truth, and I refuse to be portrayed as a helpless, confused victim. Beverly's expression shifted to one of admiration. That's exactly the attitude we need. In fact, she hesitated, considering. What would you think about making a brief, controlled statement, not to the media directly, but a recorded statement that we release on our terms? You want to counter their narrative before they can establish it? Precisely, Walter observed. A short, dignified statement from Clara, clear-eyed, articulate, resolute, would make it much harder for Blackwell to sell his confused, unstable wife story. Clara considered the suggestion. The thought of putting herself in the public eye was daunting. But the alternative, allowing Henry and his attorney to control the narrative, was worse. I'll do it, she decided, but I want to keep it factual and dignified. No emotional appeals or accusations that could seem like I'm seeking sympathy. That's the right approach, Susan Ramirez had said earlier, nodding approvingly. We can set up the recording here, a controlled environment, professional but not institutional-looking background. As they prepared for the recording, Walter helped Clara freshen up, his movements gentle as he brushed her hair and helped her adjust her clothing. You don't have to do this, he reminded her quietly. I know, Clara replied, but I want to. For too long, Henry has been speaking for me, making decisions for me, telling the world who I am. It's time for me to reclaim my voice. When everything was ready, Clara sat before the camera, her posture straight, her expression composed. Beverly stood behind the camera, giving a silent countdown before nodding for Clara to begin. My name is Clara Bennett, she began, her voice clear and steady. 3 days ago, my husband, Henry Dalton, drove me to a remote forest location and abandoned me there, without my wheelchair or any means of seeking help. This was not the result of confusion or misunderstanding on my part. It was a deliberate act, one that followed months of financial exploitation and emotional abuse. She paused, taking a measured breath before continuing. I am disabled, following a car accident 2 years ago. This has limited my physical mobility, but not my mental capacity or my ability to recognize betrayal. I am cooperating fully with the authorities who have gathered substantial evidence supporting my account of events. Clara's gaze remained direct, her voice unwavering. I am deeply grateful to those who have helped bring the truth to light, and I have faith in our justice system to address this matter appropriately. I will not be making further public statements at this time and ask for privacy as the legal process moves forward. As the recording ended, the room remained silent for a moment. The power of Clara's dignified testimony hung in the air. Perfect, Beverly said finally. Absolutely perfect. Detective Ramirez nodded agreement. Clear, concise, and impossible to dismiss as the words of someone confused or unstable. We'll release this through official channels this evening. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of legal preparations. Beverly filed emergency motions to protect Clara's assets and business interests. Detective Ramirez provided updates on the investigation as her team uncovered more evidence from Henry's office and their home. By evening, exhaustion had set in. Walter drove Clara back to his cabin, the forest that had nearly been her grave now, ironically, becoming her sanctuary from the media storm that had erupted following Henry's arrest. The statement has been released, Beverly informed them over the phone. Initial public reaction was overwhelmingly supportive. Blackwell tried to counter with a press conference, but he came across as desperate and defensive. Clara listened to the update with a strange sense of detachment. The events of the day, Henry's arrest, the revelation of his extensive plotting, her public statement, felt almost surreal. As Walter prepared a simple dinner, Clara wheeled herself to the cabin's wide window, gazing out at the darkening forest. The same trees that had witnessed her abandonment were now standing sentinel over her recovery and growing determination. There was something poetically just about that, she thought. "Penny for your thoughts," Walter asked, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I was just thinking about cycles," Clara replied. "How the forest that was meant to be my end has become my beginning instead." Walter knelt beside her wheelchair, his eyes meeting hers. "This is just the first step. Clara, the legal battle ahead won't be easy." "I know," she acknowledged, "but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm fighting for something, not just surviving. There's a difference." As they shared the quiet meal, discussing strategy for the days ahead, Clara realized that through the trauma and betrayal, she had found something she'd thought lost forever, her own strength, and people who valued her exactly as she was. The sun set over Blackwood Forest, drawing Act 4 to a close. A new chapter in Clara's life began to take shape, one built not on dependency and manipulation, but on justice, truth, and the possibility of healing. 6 months later, Clara sat in the courtroom, her wheelchair positioned at the end of the front row. Walter, a steady presence, was beside her. The journey to this moment had been arduous: depositions, hearings, motions and counter-motions, as Henry's attorney employed every tactic to delay and derail the proceedings. But now, finally, the jury was returning with their verdict. The past month had transformed Clara in ways both subtle and profound. The frightened, isolated woman abandoned in the forest was gone, replaced by someone more resilient, more determined, and perhaps most importantly, surrounded by a network of support. Her therapist, Dr. Patel, had helped her understand the patterns of Henry's abuse and her own responses to it. Beverly had become not just her attorney, but a friend and advocate, and Walter. Walter had been her constant, never pushing, always supporting. His feelings for her were evident, but respectfully restrained as she worked through her trauma. The courtroom fell silent as the jury filed in. Clara's hand sought Walter's, drawing strength from his quiet confidence. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Watkins asked. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, stood. "We have, Your Honor." Clara held her breath as the charges were read: attempted murder, financial fraud, domestic abuse, conspiracy to commit murder. On count after count, the word guilty rang through the courtroom. Henry, seated at the defense table, remained stone-faced, his shoulders rigid with tension. Carter Blackwell scribbled notes furiously, already planning appeals. When the final guilty verdict was announced, a soft exhale escaped Clara's lips. Not triumph, but relief. Relief that the truth had been heard and acknowledged, that justice, imperfect though it might be, had been served. Judge Watkins scheduled sentencing for the following month, then addressed the courtroom. "I want to thank the jury for their service in this difficult case." Court was adjourned. As the room began to clear, Clara remained seated, processing the moment. Henry was led away in handcuffs, pausing briefly to glance in her direction. Their eyes met across the courtroom. No words exchanged, none needed. In his gaze, Clara saw not remorse, but a cold calculation. Even now, measuring his chances of eventual appeal. Han tran jen kong li ko, the daiva jai thu dash. Nhung su, that luong ko kach je juach lang nghe. With Henry Dalton behind bars, a painful chapter in Clara Bennett's life had closed, but more importantly, a new chapter, filled with hope and purpose, had begun. With Henry Dalton behind bars, a painful chapter in Clara Bennett's life had closed, but more importantly, a new chapter, filled with hope and purpose, had begun. The end wasn't the end. It was just setting her free to write a new story. "How are you feeling?" Walter asked as they drove away from the courthouse. "Honestly, I'm not sure," Clara replied. "I thought I'd feel victorious or vindicated, but mostly I feel free, like I can finally stop looking over my shoulder and start looking forward instead." Walter nodded, understanding. "That makes perfect sense. This wasn't about winning for you. It was about reclaiming your life." "Exactly," Clara confirmed. "And speaking of reclaiming my life, I have something to show you." When they arrived at their destination, a small commercial building in a quiet part of Sterling Creek, Clara asked Walter to help her from the car, but declined her wheelchair. "I want to do this on my own," she explained, accepting only his arm for balance as she carefully navigated the short distance to the building's entrance using her cane. The physical therapy she'd committed to over the past months had yielded modest but meaningful improvements in her mobility. While she still relied on her wheelchair for longer distances, she had gradually regained the ability to walk short stretches with support. "What is this place?" Walter asked as Clara unlocked the door. "The future," she replied, a smile spreading across her face, leading him inside. The interior was a work in progress, walls freshly painted, furniture still covered in protective plastic, computers waiting to be set up. But the sign above the reception desk was finished, proudly displayed Sterling Creek Consulting. Phoenix Accessibility Consulting. Clara explained her new business. Her face was alight with purpose. "We provide consulting services to businesses trying to improve accessibility, not just physical accommodations, but inclusive hiring practices, adaptive technologies, the whole spectrum." Walter looked around the space, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You're turning your experience into a way to help others." "That's the plan," Clara confirmed. "I've already hired 2 consultants, one with visual impairment, another with hearing loss. We start taking clients next month." Pride filled Walter's expression. "Clara, this is incredible." "I couldn't have done it without you," she acknowledged. "Your support, your belief in me when I couldn't believe in myself. You did the hard work. I just had the privilege of witnessing it," Walter countered. They toured the small office space, Clara explaining her vision with growing animation. The business represented more than just a professional rebirth. It was her declaration of independence, her refusal to be defined by what had been done to her. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you," Clara said as they finished the tour, her tone growing more serious. The Pine Ridge cabin, Walter's cabin in the forest, had become her sanctuary during the trial, a place removed from media scrutiny and painful memories of the home she had shared with Henry. But now, with the trial concluded, decisions needed to be made. "I've been thinking about looking for my own place," Clara continued, watching Walter's face carefully. "Somewhere in the city, closer to the new office?" A flicker of disappointment crossed Walter's features before he composed himself. "Of course, that makes sense, with your new business." But Clara added, her voice softening, "I've also been thinking about us, what we've become to each other these past months." Walter met her gaze, allowing himself, for the first time, to openly show the depth of his feelings. "Clara, I would never presume," she interrupted gently. "I know, you've been incredibly respectful of my space and my healing process, but I'm ready now." She met his eyes directly. "Walter, ready to explore what we might be, together beyond crisis, in courtrooms, just us." The hope that bloomed in Walter's eyes matched the lightness Clara felt in her own heart. The tentative joy of new beginnings, built not on illusion, but on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine care. "I was thinking," she continued, "maybe we could find a place together, somewhere that isn't shadowed by either of our pasts. Not the forest, not my old house, somewhere new." Walter's smile was radiant. "I'd like that. Very much." Their moment was interrupted by Clara's phone ringing. It was Beverly, with news about the civil case against Cynthia Marsh, who had received a more lenient sentence in exchange for testimony against Henry, but still faced significant financial penalties. As Clara handled the call, Walter moved to the large window overlooking the street, giving her privacy. He watched her, confident, engaged, directing her attorney with clear purpose. He marveled at the transformation she had undergone. When she finished the call, Walter offered his hand. "Ready to go celebrate the verdict and your new venture." Clara accepted his hand, using it for balance as she rose carefully from her seat. "Actually," she said, "I think I'd like to stay here a while longer, just sit in this space and absorb the reality of it all." Understanding perfectly, Walter pulled 2 chairs together by the window. They sat side by side in companionable silence, watching the afternoon light shift across the room that represented Clara's future. "You know, Walter," Clara said after a time, "when Henry left me in that forest, he thought he was ending my story, but he was really just setting me free to write a new one." Walter's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "And what does this new story look like?" Clara. Her gaze swept across her newly launched business, then returned to meet Walter's eyes. "It looks like purpose," she said. "It looks like justice. Not just for me, but hopefully for others through this work." And she added softly, squeezing his hand, "And it looks like love, the real kind, built on truth and respect." As the sun began to set outside, casting a golden glow across the room, they remained together in that moment of possibility. 2 people who had found each other through darkness, but were now stepping together into the light of a future neither could have imagined 6 months before. In the distance, the courthouse stood as a reminder of justice served. Beyond it, the forest where Clara's journey of reclamation had begun. And here, in this sunlit room, the promise of tomorrow stretched before them. Not perfect, not without challenges, but authentically theirs to shape together. Even when everything feels destroyed, we can always find the strength to rebuild, and perhaps build something even better. Clara Bennett's journey is a powerful reminder that justice can arrive, recovery is possible, and love can find us in the places we least expect. Clara Bennett's journey is a powerful reminder that justice can arrive, recovery is possible, and love can find us in the places we least expect. Think back to that image at the beginning of our story. Clara, alone and terrified in the dark woods of Blackwood Forest, pushed there by the man who vowed to cherish her. It's a chilling picture of vulnerability, of betrayal. But look at Clara today. She sits in her own office, the founder of Phoenix Accessibility Consulting, a business born from her own experience and determination. She is surrounded not by shadows of deceit, but by light and purpose. She has rebuilt her life, not just surviving, but thriving. Her journey wasn't a solo one. It took the quiet vigilance of Walter, driven by instinct and a past connection. It took the professional expertise and unwavering belief of Frank Peterson and Beverly Jenkins. It took the compassion and support of Detective Susan Ramirez and victims advocate Helen Taylor. These individuals weren't just characters in her story. They were the hands that helped her rise, the voices that amplified her truth, the pillars that supported her fight for justice. They are a testament to the power of kindness, the importance of seeing and believing victims, and the fact that even in the face of immense darkness, there are people committed to bringing light. Henry Dalton's actions are a stark warning about the insidious nature of abuse, how it can hide behind a seemingly perfect facade, how vulnerability can be exploited by those closest to us. His story ends behind bars, a consequence of his own calculated cruelty. But Clara's story continues, a narrative of resilience, strength, and hope. Her journey teaches us that even when faced with the most brutal betrayal, the power to stand up, to reclaim our narrative, to redefine our future, is always within us. Sometimes, all we need is a spark of courage, a hand reaching out in the darkness, and the unwavering belief that we are worthy of recovery, worthy of justice, and worthy of happiness. I believe that stories like Clara's are incredibly important. They don't just expose the hidden cruelties that exist, they inspire us to believe in the remarkable resilience of the human spirit and highlight the critical importance of building communities where support and justice are not just ideals, but realities. Remember, you are never alone. There are resources. There are people willing to listen and help. If Clara's story touched you, or if you've ever witnessed or experienced something similar, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters, and your willingness to speak can be a light for someone else navigating their own darkness. If you want to hear more stories about resilience, about justice being served, and about the power of rebuilding, make sure you've hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. And consider sharing this video with anyone you think needs to hear Clara's story of hope. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next video.